It all started quite simply, not too long ago. My wife and I had been going through a rough patch in our relationship. You know how it is, small disagreements snowball into larger issues, and before you know it, tension fills the air. But there's something about Christmas, a time when people try to set aside their grievances and pretend everything is fine for the sake of family harmony. That was the plan for us as well. A week before the holiday, we agreed to keep things civil, no arguments, just peace. Later that same day, I overheard my wife talking on the phone. Apparently, she had made a bet with someone. Can you believe that? I didn't catch the full details of what the bet was about, and naturally, curiosity got the better of me. When I asked her about it directly, she brushed it off, saying she had made a silly wager with her friend about whether she could manage to accomplish something before Christmas. It's supposed to be a surprise for you, she added with a smile. But don't worry, I'll make sure it's worth the wait. With that, she walked off, leaving me with more questions than answers. Throughout the day, my wife spent an unusual amount of time on her phone, which only piqued my curiosity further. Then, out of the blue, she started getting ready to go out. She wasn't just throwing on her usual casual outfit, either. She dressed up, makeup, a nice coat, everything. Naturally, I asked where she was headed. To the store, she said. Just for 10 minutes, and then I'm meeting my friend. I need to pick up some things for Christmas dinner and make everything look perfect. Hopefully, we can avoid fighting even for this one day. Given how tense things had been recently, I decided not to push it. She went on to explain that after the shopping trip, her friend would be taking some photos of her in the snow for Instagram. It'll be quick, she promised. Just a little outing, and I'll be back in an hour. Meanwhile, you have an important task, cleaning the house. Can you handle that? I agreed without hesitation. It seemed straightforward enough, and I figured it might help keep things smooth between us. After she left, I called my best friend, Danny, to help me with the cleaning and to keep me company. Danny is a talker, he loves to share every detail of his life. Within minutes, he was recounting yet another disastrous Tinder date. If you've ever met someone like Danny, you'll know what I mean when I say that his stories can test your patience. Still, it was a distraction from scrubbing floors and dusting shelves, so I let him ramble on. As time passed, I couldn't help but notice that my wife had been gone for over an hour. When I checked the fridge, I realized we were out of milk, so I decided to text her. No response. That's when I started to wonder what was taking so long. 2 hours later, she finally returned home, her coat dusted with snow and her arms full of shopping bags. I started unloading the groceries and quickly noticed something odd. The bags didn't contain half the items she had planned to buy. Stranger still, I caught a faint whiff of men's cologne on her. It wasn't overpowering, but it was noticeable enough to make me pause. I decided to approach the situation calmly. Why did you say you'd be gone for an hour and end up taking 2? I asked. She sighed and explained that the store had been packed with people, with long lines at every register. On top of that, her friend had been late. To prove her point, she played me a voice message from her friend, who was frantically complaining about not being able to find the right outfit for their snowy photo session. It all sounded plausible. Okay, but why didn't you get everything on your list? I pressed further. She rolled her eyes and explained that the shelves were practically empty. You wouldn't believe how chaotic it was, she said. I almost got into a fight with an older woman over the last bottle of champagne. To back up her story, she pulled out her phone and showed me a video her friend had recorded. In it, my wife could be seen squaring off with the woman, jokingly suggesting they settle the matter with a snowball fight. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. But there was still the matter of the cologne. One last thing, I said. Why do you smell like men's cologne? She seemed genuinely puzzled for a moment before explaining. Apparently, she had been trying to reach a pineapple on a high shelf when a man had offered to help. He must have just bathed in that stuff, she said with a shrug. I probably brushed against him while he was handing it to me. Nothing sinister, I promise. As if to change the subject, she showed me the photos her friend had taken. They were harmless enough, playful shots of her tossing snow and smiling against a wintry backdrop. She pointed out the details in the pictures, commenting on how beautiful the snowfall had been and how they managed to capture the light just perfectly. It all seemed innocent, even if I still found the timing odd. I decided not to press further for the sake of maintaining peace. We still had a lot to prepare for Christmas, and the last thing I wanted was another argument. "All right," I said finally. "Let's unpack these groceries." As we put everything away, she started talking about her plans for decorating the house. She had bought a new set of Christmas lights and was eager to string them up around the living room. I nodded along, trying to focus on the tasks at hand. Danny, who had been quietly listening up until now, chimed in with his own stories about Christmas traditions, steering the conversation away from anything potentially tense. It helped lighten the mood considerably. The tension from earlier had eased, and for now, we returned to the task at hand, focusing on preparing for Christmas. By the time we were done unpacking, the house felt warmer, more festive, as if the small cloud of suspicion had lifted. For the moment, everything seemed back to normal, and I decided to let the day end on a good note. A little more time passed, and I decided it was time to go pick up my wife's Christmas gift. She had mentioned she wanted us to exchange something meaningful this year, and I'd had the perfect idea for a while, a custom ring with her name engraved on it. She'd once said how cool it would be to have matching rings, so in a way, it was a gift for both of us. It had taken weeks to be made, but when I finally saw it, it was perfect, exactly as I'd imagined. As I prepared to leave, my wife mentioned she'd be heading out as well. We had 2 cars, so that wasn't an issue. However, she insisted on taking a different route. "No peeking at what I'm up to," she joked. I didn't mind. If anything, her excitement about Christmas made me feel more relaxed. I paid for the ring, picked it up, and drove home feeling pretty pleased with myself. When I got there, though, she still wasn't back. I texted her to say I'd gotten her gift. She replied almost instantly, saying she was thrilled but needed more time because her gift for me wasn't going to be something simple like socks. "You're going to love it. You have no idea what it is," she added. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I decided to relax for a bit, firing up the PlayStation to play basketball with the guys online. The game went on for a while, and still, there was no sign of her. Just as I started to feel a bit uneasy, my phone buzzed. It was her, saying she was on her way home. I wrapped up the game and decided to make coffee for her arrival. About 30 minutes later, I heard the front door open. She walked in carrying a sizable wrap box. "Wow, that's impressive," I said, eyeing the box. "Don't even think about opening it before Christmas," she warned with a smile. "Don't worry," I replied. "I'm not a kid." She laughed. "Sure you're not." Then she paused, rubbing her shoulders. "Hey, could you grab my bag from the car? I'm so tired I just need to sit down for a minute." "Of course," I said, grabbing my coat and boots. Outside, the air was crisp, and I found her bag sitting in the passenger seat. As I reached for it, I caught a faint but unusual smell. Curious, I looked around and spotted a crumpled receipt. It read 2 pumpkin lattes. That was odd. Why would she have stopped for coffee, and who had she shared it with? I carried the bag inside and handed it to her. "Here you go," I said casually. "By the way, why were you gone so long?" "Oh, it's a bit of a story," she began. "I didn't want to get you something generic, so I drove all the way to this specialty gift shop on the other side of town. My friend recommended it, and you wouldn't believe how amazing it is. It's like a mini AliExpress in real life, with all these unique items. Look, I even recorded some videos to show you how cool it is." She pulled out her phone and played a video. In it, she was browsing through shelves filled with quirky, colorful items, narrating her excitement. "See? You'd have loved this place," she said. It did look interesting, but I couldn't shake the question in my mind. "Okay, but what's with the receipt for 2 pumpkin lattes?" I asked. She looked surprised for a moment but quickly smiled. Oh, that. The sales lady was so helpful, she stayed late past her break to help me pick the perfect gift. So, as a thank you, I treated her to coffee at a nearby cafe. We ended up chatting about husbands, Christmas, and life in general. It was nice, and she even followed me on Instagram. Look, here's her profile, she said, showing me the screen. That's thoughtful of you, I said, feeling satisfied with her explanation. Anything else I should know? Oh, definitely, she replied with a grin. She also gave me this car air freshener with a vanilla scent. You just put a few drops in the vent, and it smells amazing, perfect for the holidays. That does sound nice, I said, nodding. By the way, your gift is already under the tree. You'll get to open it on Christmas Day. She leaned over, kissed me on the cheek, and said, That's perfect. I can't wait. As the afternoon stretched on, we decided to take a break and relax with a movie. She picked out a Christmas classic, and we curled up on the couch with warm mugs of cocoa. It felt like the perfect way to wind down after a busy day, letting the holiday atmosphere fill the room. We shared laughs at the funny scenes and commented on how movies like this never get old. This is going to be our best Christmas yet, she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. I think you're right, I replied, wrapping my arm around her. The simplicity of the moment reminded me why I cherished her so much. It wasn't about the big gestures or expensive gifts, it was moments like these, where we could just be together, that made everything special. As the sun began to set, she turned to me with a sly grin. So, do you think you'll be able to wait until Christmas to open my gift? I'll try my best, I said, laughing. But if it's as good as you say, it'll be tough. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. As I sat there, I thought about how much effort she'd put into making this holiday special. Whatever was in that big box, I knew it would be something she'd chosen with care. For now, though, I decided to let the mystery wait. Christmas morning would be here soon enough, and I had a feeling it would be one to remember. I think everyone has that one friend who knows how to ruin a perfectly good moment, right? For me, that friend is Jacob. Just as I had settled into my chair to relax, Jacob called. Hey guys, he said, sounding unusually cheery. So, my relatives are coming in from out of town, and I just realized my house is completely undecorated for Christmas. What do you think about coming over to help? I'd really appreciate it. I muted the microphone on my phone and turned to my wife. We've got a situation. Jacob's house is still bare, and he's asking for help with decorations. Should we go? She thought for a moment and then said, Sure, why not? But wait a second. Oh, no. We forgot about something. Her face lit up in realization. Remember the neighbors? They left their dog with us before going to Thailand. They asked us to take care of him, and we haven't walked him today. She was right. The neighbor's dog was quite independent and didn't need constant attention, but we had agreed to check in, top up his food, and take him out for a walk every day. In the chaos of the day, we'd completely forgotten. How about this, she suggested. You go help Jacob, and I'll take care of the dog. Does that work? Sure, no problem, I said. I grabbed my coat, got into the car, and headed to Jacob's place. When I arrived, he greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, going on about how busy he'd been and how grateful he was for the help. Man, I don't know what I was thinking, leaving everything to the last minute, he admitted. We got to work immediately. The house was a mess, with boxes of decorations scattered everywhere. It took us a good while just to sort through them and figure out where to start. There were tangled strings of lights, garlands stuffed into bags, and ornaments still wrapped in tissue paper from the year before. As we hung garlands, strung lights, and arranged ornaments, a few more friends showed up to lend a hand. Despite the chaos, there was something satisfying about transforming the house into a festive wonderland. Jacob was his usual talkative self, going on about his relatives and how they'd react when they saw the decorations. You know, my aunt loves Christmas trees, he said, pointing to a corner where the tree would go. but if it's not perfectly symmetrical, she'll let me hear about it for weeks. We all laughed, but we knew he wasn't joking. About an hour into the decorating, my phone buzzed. It was my wife. Her voice sounded tense as she said, "Hey, I can't make it to help. Something came up. Everything's fine, but I'll explain when I get home." "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. "Yeah, I'm fine. Don't worry. I'll tell you everything later," she said. I decided not to press her further and focused on the task at hand. With the extra hands, we managed to finish decorating Jacob's house in a couple of hours. It looked fantastic, like something out of a holiday movie. We had put up a tree adorned with colorful ornaments, lights twinkled along the walls, and garlands hung from the banisters. Jacob, being the generous guy he is, handed me a bottle of expensive whiskey as a thank you gift. I accepted it gladly, packed up, and headed home. When I got back, my wife was already there. She'd brought the neighbor's dog back inside and was sitting on the couch with a serious expression on her face. I asked her what had happened. "You won't believe this," she began. "While I was walking the dog, I ran into an old friend in the park. We started talking, and then she just broke down crying. Turns out she's having major family issues. Her parents got into a huge fight right before Christmas, and she's struggling to figure out how to bring them back together. I felt so bad for her that I ended up crying too. But she's doing a bit better now, and she even gave me some cake to take home." She gestured toward the kitchen. "I brought a couple of slices for us." "That's really thoughtful of her," I said. "Did you invite her over?" "I thought about it," she said, "but I remembered this is our Christmas. I wanted to keep it just for us." She paused, then brightened up. "Oh, and you have to see the photos I took of the dog playing in the snow. He was having the best time ever." My wife loved taking pictures, and this was no exception. She showed me a series of shots of the dog rolling around, jumping, and burying his nose in the snow. They were adorable, and her excitement was contagious. We spent a few minutes scrolling through the photos, laughing at the dog's antics. She described how the dog had found a pile of fresh snow and acted like it was the greatest thing in the world, diving into it face first and wagging his tail like crazy. Still, as the evening wound down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the day had been unusually eventful. Between Jacob's last-minute decoration panic, my wife's unexpected encounter in the park, and everything else that had happened, it felt like we'd crammed a week's worth of activity into a single day. Every time I thought about how the day had started so simply, I couldn't help but marvel at how much had happened. And believe me, you won't believe what happened next. The morning of Christmas arrived, and my wife woke me up with a bright smile on her face. "Hey, let's save opening our gifts for tonight when it's just the two of us," she said. Still half asleep, I nodded, not entirely sure what she was planning. Then she added, "Don't forget, we have a very important task to do today." I blinked a few times, trying to process what she was talking about. "What task?" I mumbled, my brain not quite awake yet. "We need to deliver the gifts to our friends," she reminded me. Suddenly, it clicked. Every year, we gave small presents to our close friends and made a point of dropping them off on Christmas morning. "Ah, right. I almost forgot," I said, shaking off the last remnants of sleep. My wife immediately started getting ready, heading to the bathroom to do her makeup. I, on the other hand, saw no point in going to such lengths. "Why are you getting all dolled up?" I asked. "Because I'm doing it for you," she replied, teasingly. "Later tonight, we'll be spending time together, just the two of us. Don't you want me to look my best?" I chuckled and said, "Fair enough. Do what you've got to do." Still, I decided to freshen up myself. I trimmed my beard, put on a festive shirt, and dabbed on some cologne. By the time I was done, she was nearly finished as well, running around the house in a flurry of activity, trying to find the perfect dress for the occasion. When she finally settled on a gorgeous outfit, we loaded the car with a pile of wrapped gifts we'd prepared and headed out. The morning air was crisp but not too cold, and the streets were quiet, the kind of calm you only experience on Christmas morning. Our first few stops went smoothly. We would knock on the door, exchange warm greetings, hand over the gifts, and stay just long enough to spread some cheer before heading to the next house. Everyone was so welcoming, and the joy in their faces made the effort of delivering the gifts worth it. As we made our rounds, my wife's cheerful energy was contagious. She kept chatting about how happy she was to see everyone so excited. "It's moments like these that make Christmas special," she said, and I couldn't agree more. Finally, we arrived at our last stop. This visit was to close friends of ours who always hosted big gatherings. Sure enough, their house was already buzzing with activity. Relatives, friends, and neighbors filled every room, and the sound of laughter and holiday music spilled out into the street. As we stepped out of the car, my wife suddenly gasped. "Oh no! I forgot the gift in the car." I followed her inside while she went back to retrieve it. The moment I entered, I was greeted by our friend and his girlfriend, who ushered me into the living room. Come in, come in." "You can't just leave without saying hello to everyone," they insisted. Reluctantly, I let myself be pulled into conversations with various guests. My wife soon joined me with the gift, but before I could hand it over, she whispered, "I'll take care of this. You mingle and show your handsome face to the crowd." With that, she disappeared upstairs with the gift and our friend's girlfriend. Meanwhile, I stayed downstairs, chatting with people I hadn't seen in ages. The atmosphere was infectious, and before long, I found myself laughing harder than I had in months. I almost lost track of time, but eventually, I realized my wife was still upstairs. Just as I began to wonder what was taking so long, she came back down with our friends, all three of them grinning from ear to ear. "Mission accomplished," she announced. "Those Kigurumi costumes, we got them, are a perfect fit." The joy in her voice was evident, and it was clear the gift had been a hit. We stayed for a little while longer, joining in the conversations and laughter. The topics ranged from funny holiday mishaps to more serious discussions, including one particular story that caught everyone's attention. One of the guests shared a shocking tale about a couple they knew who had such a massive fight that the wife had cheated on her husband right on Christmas Day. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone processed the gravity of the situation. "That's absolutely awful," my wife said, shaking her head in disbelief. "No one deserves to go through that, especially not during the holidays. I hope they find a way to work through it, but honestly, only God can judge them." I nodded in agreement, appreciating her empathy but also wanting to steer the conversation back to lighter topics. Shortly after, we said our goodbyes and headed back to the car. As we drove home, the car was filled with a comfortable silence for a few minutes before I decided to ask something that had been on my mind. "So, what was that bet with your friend about?" My wife squirmed in her seat a little, as if trying to find the right words. "Oh, that," she said, laughing nervously. "Well, you see, it's exactly what you've been experiencing these past 2 days. When I told her all the things we planned to do for Christmas, she said there was no way I'd be able to pull it all off. So, naturally, I bet her I could." I raised an eyebrow. "And all the secrecy? That was just to mess with me?" She grinned mischievously. "Pretty much. I thought it'd be fun to see how you'd react. But honestly, you handled it way better than I expected. You didn't even seem fazed." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I'll admit, I was expecting something a little more dramatic, but okay. Fair enough." With that, we pulled into our driveway. I said, I was expecting something else, of course, but all right. And with that, we went inside. Finally, it was just the two of us. After the long and busy day, my wife and I exchanged our gifts and settled down with some drinks to enjoy each other's company. The warm glow of the Christmas lights filled the room, and the sound of soft holiday music played in the background. It felt like the perfect moment. Perhaps as you listen to this, you're wondering when the real story begins. Let me tell you, it started on that very night. As the evening went on, my wife drank a bit more than usual. She laughed, joked, and eventually drifted off to sleep, resting her head on my shoulder. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, until her phone vibrated with a notification. The screen lit up, and I couldn't help but notice the message, "Check our secret chat about the bet." The words immediately caught my attention. I didn't react at first, letting the phone sit on the table. But a few minutes later, the message disappeared, leaving nothing but my growing suspicion. If the bet was as meaningless as she'd claimed, why would they need a secret chat? And why delete the message? An old memory came back to me. I had once known the password to her phone but had never had a reason to use it. Tonight, for the first time, I felt compelled. I carefully shifted her off my shoulder, laying her down on the couch, and picked up her phone. Quietly, I stepped into the bathroom and locked the door. With the phone in hand, I hesitated. A part of me didn't want to know what I might find, but another part knew I had to. I unlocked her phone and started scrolling through her messages. It didn't take long to find a link to a secret chat, a browser-based group conversation. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside the chat, I found messages between my wife, her friend, and a few others. At first, the conversation seemed innocent enough, until I scrolled further. That's when I saw the real topic of their discussion, their bet. And it wasn't about completing errands or holiday tasks as she had led me to believe. The bet was about whether my wife could cheat on me 4 times during Christmas. I was stunned. My stomach churned as I continued to read. The messages were explicit and detailed. Her friend, who was also married, had made the same bet with her husband. The two of them had turned their marriages into a game, comparing notes and sharing stories about how they had managed to deceive their spouses. My wife wasn't just participating, she was fully involved. The more I read, the angrier I became. The first incident was during her supposed trip to the grocery store. It turned out her elaborate excuses had been carefully planned. She had cheated on me with an acquaintance who worked at the store, right in the storage room. Her carefully rehearsed stories about lines and chaos at the store were nothing but lies. The second incident occurred during her so-called gift shopping trip. She had claimed to travel across town to buy something special, but instead, she had visited her ex-boyfriend. According to the chat, she had told him that she was already divorced from me. They'd spent hours together, and she had slept with him. I couldn't believe how easily she had fabricated an excuse and made me believe it. The third incident was when she had offered to walk the neighbor's dog. While I was decorating Jacob's house, she had taken the dog to a neighbor who lived on the other side of the park. There had been no friend in the park and no emotional encounter. Instead, she had cheated on me again, this time with that neighbor. The cake she brought home? It had come from him. The final betrayal happened earlier that very day. When she went upstairs to deliver the gift, she had involved herself in a love triangle with my friend and his girlfriend. The thought of it made me feel physically sick. How could she smile and act as if nothing had happened? I took screenshots of every message, saving the evidence to my phone. My hands shook as I went through each detail. I needed to know everything, no matter how painful it was. Her actions were beyond anything I could have imagined, and her friend was equally guilty. Together, they had turned what should have been a season of love and warmth into something vile and despicable. Once I had all the proof, I put her phone back and returned to the living room. She was still sleeping soundly, completely unaware of what I had just discovered. I sat down, staring at the twinkling Christmas lights, and let my thoughts race. Rage, betrayal, and disbelief all flooded through me. I knew one thing for certain, I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't just going to confront her, I was going to ensure that everyone involved paid for what they had done. My wife's betrayal wasn't just a personal attack on me, it was a calculated series of actions that showed complete disregard for our marriage and everything we had built together. The others who had helped her, whether directly or indirectly, weren't going to escape accountability either. Her friend, her ex-boyfriend, the neighbor, even my so-called friend, they were all going to feel the consequences of their actions. With the evidence in hand and a plan forming in my mind, I resolved to take action. I wasn't going to let this be just another story of infidelity. It was time to prepare, to strategize, and to ensure that they all faced the fallout of their choices. I will prepare to destroy not only my wife's life but also the lives of everyone who helped her in this. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. I explained that I wanted to secretly file for divorce. My goal was to ensure my wife never saw it coming until everything was finalized. To buy some time, I told her that the gift she'd received wasn't the main one and that another, more special gift would be arriving later. Her face lit up with excitement, and she said she couldn't wait to see it. I promised to let her know when it was ready and added that I needed to refuel the car, giving me an excuse to leave the house. As soon as I was in the car, I called the husband of my wife's friend, the one who had initiated the bet. I explained everything I had discovered, including the messages and the details of their affair. I made sure to tell him not to mention that the information had come from me. I've still got my own plans to handle my wife, I said. He assured me he'd take care of his own situation and thanked me for letting him know. Next on my list was the man from the supermarket. It didn't take much effort to get him fired. I simply called the store's management and reported that inappropriate behavior had taken place in the storage room on the day in question. I suggested they check the security footage for confirmation. A few hours later, I received a call back. The manager informed me that the man had been terminated. Hearing that brought me a sense of satisfaction, one less person to escape the consequences of their actions. Then there was the neighbor. This one required a more calculated approach. We had spoken casually in the past, and I knew he had a wife and 2 kids. I also knew he was involved in some questionable activities, including buying firearms at suspiciously low prices. My first move was to send his wife all the incriminating messages. She called me almost immediately, thanking me profusely and saying she had suspected something for a while but hadn't been able to prove it. My second move was to anonymously report his illegal activities to the authorities. I filed a detailed complaint, including everything I knew about his shady purchases. It would take some time, but I was confident it would create serious problems for him down the line. After dealing with the neighbor, I turned my attention to my wife's ex-boyfriend. I hadn't heard much about him in years, so I did some digging on social media. It didn't take long to find his Instagram profile, where he had several pictures with a woman who appeared to be his fiancée. Curious, I clicked on her account and saw a story about their upcoming wedding preparations. The hypocrisy was staggering. This man, who was about to get married, had spent a day with my wife under the guise of buying a wedding suit and had used that opportunity to cheat on his fiancée. I decided to send her all the screenshots of their messages. Her response was immediate. She thanked me for exposing the truth and shared her side of the story. She confirmed that he had told her he was going suit shopping but now realized he'd used the time to sleep with my wife. In the end, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Not only had I uncovered his deceit, but I had also prevented another marriage built on lies. As the day unfolded, I found myself reflecting on how each person involved had made choices that showed complete disregard for the people they claimed to care about. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about revealing the truth and holding everyone accountable for their actions. Finally, I turned my attention to my so-called friend and his girlfriend. This situation was trickier because they had both been complicit in the betrayal. However, I knew that his family was deeply conservative and extremely religious. I still had his father's number from when I had helped them with a home renovation project. I decided to call him and send him the evidence of their involvement. The reaction was swift and brutal. His father's voice trembled with a mix of anger and disappointment as he said, "Now, I can no longer call him my son." Those words told me everything I needed to know. The fallout in their family would be immense, and I felt no sympathy for the chaos my so-called friend had brought upon himself. When I returned home, my wife was visibly shaken. She was trying to maintain her composure, but it was clear that the events of the day had left her rattled. She could sense that the people she had been involved with were facing serious consequences, and it was only a matter of time before her own actions caught up with her. Her hands trembled slightly as she went about her usual routines, avoiding eye contact with me as much as possible. The air was thick with tension, and I could tell she was on edge, waiting for the moment when everything would come crashing down. She knew her turn was coming, but she had no idea when or how. As the evening progressed, I decided to push the boundaries a little further to see just how nervous she was. I casually mentioned that I'd had an interesting day and had run into a few people who seemed oddly flustered. Her reaction was immediate. Her face paled slightly, and she stammered out a vague response about how people can be unpredictable during the holidays. "It's funny, isn't it?" I said, leaning back in my chair. "How some people's secrets always seem to come out at the worst possible times?" She nodded quickly, trying to change the subject, but her unease was impossible to miss. I continued to play my role, acting as though nothing was out of the ordinary. Let her stew in her anxiety, I thought. She deserved every second of it. But I wouldn't confront her just yet. Not until the divorce papers were ready. Only then would I deliver the final blow and watch her world crumble around her. Every interaction between us became a silent battle. She would try to gauge how much I knew, while I carefully concealed my knowledge, letting her spiral further into paranoia. She started checking her phone more frequently, almost as if expecting bad news to arrive at any moment. I caught her glancing at me nervously more than once, her hands fidgeting as she tried to keep up appearances. Meanwhile, I was meticulously documenting every step of my plan, ensuring that when the time came, I would have irrefutable proof to back up my actions. The screenshots, the messages, the details of every lie she had told, all of it was carefully organized and stored. I wasn't just preparing for a confrontation, I was preparing to dismantle the facade she had built. The weight of her own guilt was starting to show. She began to make small mistakes, forgetting things she usually remembered, misplacing items around the house, and even snapping at me over trivial matters. It was as if the walls were closing in on her, and she knew there was no escape. But I wasn't ready to end the game just yet. Let her know that the end was near, but let her wait in uncertainty. That was the least she deserved for what she had done. And so, I waited, keeping my composure and maintaining the charade, knowing that her reckoning was only a matter of time. When my lawyer finally called and told me that the divorce papers were ready, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. It was time to bring this chapter to a close. I placed the documents in a box, carefully wrapped it as if it were the most thoughtful gift, and prepared myself for the confrontation. As I drove home, I rehearsed what I would say, but nothing felt quite right. In the end, I decided to keep it simple. When I walked through the door, my wife greeted me with her usual cheerful demeanor, but I could see the nervousness behind her eyes. She had been walking on eggshells for days, clearly aware that the world around her was crumbling. I handed her the gift box with a wide smile and told her how much I loved her. Her face lit up, though her hands trembled slightly as she took the package. "What's this?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Just a little something special for you," I replied, keeping my tone light. I gestured for her to open it, and she eagerly tore off the wrapping paper. As soon as she saw the contents, her expression shifted from excitement to horror. Her face turned pale, and she clutched the documents as if they were burning her hands. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by her sudden outburst. "Please, no. I'm begging you." "I don't want to be next," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. Tears streamed down her face as she collapsed onto her knees, pleading for me to reconsider. But her words didn't move me. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. Her actions had destroyed our marriage, and there was no coming back from that. She continued to cry, repeating over and over how sorry she was, but all I could think about was the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, the utter lack of respect for what we had built together. "You knew what you were doing," I said coldly. "You knew every step of the way, and you still went through with it. Now, you're just facing the consequences." Her sobs grew louder as I began gathering her belongings. I didn't care about the mess or the chaos. I stuffed her clothes into suitcases, plastic bags, whatever I could find, and tossed them out onto the front lawn. Her cries grew more frantic with every trip I made back and forth from the house. "Please, stop. Let's talk about this," she begged, clinging to the doorframe as I made another trip. "We're done talking," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. Go stay with your mother. You're not welcome here anymore. Eventually, she realized that her pleas were falling on deaf ears. She grabbed her things and stumbled to her car, still sobbing uncontrollably. As she drove away, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in days, the house was quiet. The tension that had hung in the air like a storm cloud was finally gone. The next time I saw her was in court. The divorce process was grueling, endless paperwork, heated arguments, and constant back and forth between lawyers. She fought hard, trying to salvage whatever she could, but the evidence was stacked against her. I had every message, every photo, every detail of her infidelity. It was undeniable, and the judge saw that. The proceedings dragged on for months, each hearing more exhausting than the last. But in the end, justice prevailed. The divorce was finalized in my favor, and she left the courtroom defeated. I walked out feeling lighter, as though a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. With the legal battle behind me, I decided it was time to make a fresh start. The first thing I did was change the locks on the house. I wanted no lingering traces of her in my life. Then, I took some much-needed time off work and headed to visit my family. When I arrived, they welcomed me with open arms, offering the kind of warmth and support I hadn't felt in months. It was exactly what I needed. I invited a few close friends as well, and together we celebrated Christmas properly. We laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed each other's company without the shadow of betrayal looming over us. As I sat by the fireplace, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, I couldn't help but reflect on how drastically my life had changed in just a few days. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a turning point. It forced me to confront the truth and take control of my own happiness. Meanwhile, my ex-wife's life had taken a very different turn. The fallout from her actions had been swift and severe. Her friendships were in shambles, her reputation was tarnished, and she was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had destroyed with her own choices. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering, but I couldn't deny the sense of justice it brought. She had played a dangerous game and lost. Now, it was time for me to move forward and leave her behind. Christmas that year marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It was a reminder of how quickly life can change and how important it is to value the people who truly deserve your love and trust. Surrounded by family and friends, I finally felt at peace, ready to embrace whatever the future held. As for my ex-wife, she was no longer my concern. Her actions had spoken louder than any apology ever could, and I had no intention of letting her back into my life. The road ahead was mine to walk, free from the shadows of betrayal and deceit. And with every step, I felt stronger, more confident, and more determined to build a life that was truly worth living.